Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Red Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Coltin Schachtner-Kramer. Red Effect Podcast is brought to you by REDSTAR. REDSTAR, where our red makes you green. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Red Effect Podcast. Red Effect Podcast is brought to you by REDSTAR. REDSTAR, where our red makes you green. So today, if you watched the first episode, we have a familiar guest, Tom Stanton. Thanks for being here again, Tom. You know, Tom, I think if we get you to 5 podcasts, we'll get you a little pin for your free miles.
I think that would be good.
Yeah.
And maybe a free coffee or something.
Oh, I'm sure we can work something. Maybe some REDSTAR here for you.
I need a new REDSTAR shirt.
Okay. So. I'm sure we can get that figured out. All right. So, Tom, if you would, could you just give us a brief introduction of what you've done in the past and what your history is with biologicals in this market for anybody who may have not watched the last episode?
Sure. Tom Stanton, we work with REDSTAR Branded Fertilizer, and going into my 31st year in the ag business, which is good. Started my career out in the crop protection part of the world, CB Gaggy, Novartis, Syngenta, and from there really wanted to get into soil fertility and plant nutrition. And so went to work for a company called Loveland Products and learned a lot of really good things there with a lot of people. And from there went on to help start another company called Invictus Crop Care and help them get their nutritional business together. And from there, I did have my own consulting business, tried to help some dealers and customers with their businesses and their nutritional businesses and kind of outline that. As far as biologicals, since about 2006, I've been involved in the biological space.
So you were a pretty early adopter as far as the Midwest.
From a Midwest perspective, yeah, I would say we probably were one of the companies I was working with at that time, really got into it big and fast and learned a lot. It's still one of the really good products in the market today. And I think we've kind of taken ours and kind of patterned it a little bit after that. But it taught me when I started working with biologicals that there's something else happening besides just traditional NP and K. And one of the first things I learned, I'll never forget it, in Minnesota, was we put some stuff on some dry fertilizer, and the next year the things we saw, corn plants that were of complete growth stage ahead, when we got to the end of the year, you're seeing 20 to 30 bushel yield increases. That really kind of locked me in from, hearing that this is what it's going to do, to seeing it in the field, to realizing that growers can actually profit from this. And so from there, every year I've just tried to learn more, to try to get better. And, biologicals are improving all the time. And we need to continue to find ways to look at making fertilizer more efficient for our customers, so their return on investment can increase and they can be profitable.
Perfect. So me and you, we spend a lot of time in the truck together. One thing that seems consistent no matter where we go is our growers are seeing that they have a lot of residue in their fields, whether that be the higher yields because a bigger crop produces more residue. It could be the drought. We just didn't have the moisture to degrade that residue. It could be genetics. It seems that corn on corn is becoming more popular. We have our obvious solutions like disc ripping, disking, field cultivating. But with the rise of no-till and strip-till, what are some things that growers can do to help degrade that residue and improve those soil conditions and release nutrients back to the soil?
Yeah, it's a big issue. And over the last, 20 years, as our hybrids have improved and continue to improve, this number may not be exactly right, but I think every year national yield from genetic improvements, somewhere between 2 and 2.5 bushel an acre. And so every bushel increase you have in productivity, you're creating more stover, more residue. And it continues to be an issue. Even in corn and soybean rotations, where you take that soybean year, which actually burns carbon or burns residue, sometimes you kind of need that because we're getting so much corn residue. But, here in Nebraska and Western Iowa, where we get a lot of corn on corn, residue becomes a real problem to manage. You know, and a lot of folks have gone to like bale in their stalks, right, to help manage that. But, you know, that's not always a great thing either, because there's a lot of fertilizer tied up in those stalks, and there's a lot of really good carbon that's going to feed our bacteria and fungi in the soil. So you don't want to remove it. You want to figure out, how can we keep it there, but how can we minimize the effects that residue has when we're going to plant the following year's crop?
Well, in addition to baling, if you don't have cattle or need for that, it's not practical for a lot of growers.
No, and I, you know, the last 2 years you mentioned we've been really dry, and you know, you look at the fall of 22 and the fall of 23, and all the growers that were baling corn stalks, right? Because they may have had cattle, and I just sit there and I look at that and I go, wow, look at all that potash that's leaving that farm.
Yeah.
You know, and you look at the potash price and go, wow, you know, they're losing $40-50 an acre in potash. But you know, if it's going to go through an animal and we're going to return that manure back to the field, you know, that's a different story. But we still like the value that carbon has in the field and what it's doing for our microbes, and making sure that, you know, they're healthy. And when the microbes are healthy, next year's crop's healthy, and that means your yield's going to be healthy.
Yeah, definitely. So go off of baling. So when we look at a removal chart for that stover in the crop, we can see on any crop that stover takes a lot of the nutrients. It's not all going to grain, especially things like potassium. That stover takes a lot of it. So in 1 ton of stover, there's roughly 17 pounds of nitrogen, 4 pounds of phosphorus, 34 pounds of potassium, and 3 pounds of sulfur per ton. So in those 4 nutrients, that's about $27 at today's prices of nutrients that you're pulling off. And for every 40 bushels you raise, roughly, it depends on genetics, but for about every 40 bushels you raise, that's 1 ton of residue. So if we're looking at 280 bushel corn crop, so higher yielding, that's 6 tons of residue, and that's about $189 an acre that you would be pulling off through baling. So what can we do to help growers make that stover that's in their field not only be used the next year, because obviously we're going to get some back just through natural degradation, but it might take 2, 3, maybe 4 years for that to become available. So what are some things we do, and what's some of the data behind that we have?
Yeah, so, you know, Father Time keeps ticking every second. And in this case, you know, we get 6 or 7 months a year of frost-free weather here in the Midwest, which means we're getting 5 to 6 months where it's really cold, and that's going to limit the biological activity in those situations and in those fields, to where all of a sudden, you know, we're not getting that good degradation of those stocks. So if we finished harvesting in November, right, it's really cold, and then we get back in that field in April, you know, generally speaking, the amount of stock degradation that we get in the winter months is very small. Now, biological activity never stops per se. It just slows way down when we get cold. But some of the things that we can look at that don't involve disc ripping and tillage or baling stocks is, you know, we got started probably 15, 20 years ago with, hey, let's go out and put some, you know, 32 or 28% nitrogen on these stocks, you know, to try to help them to break down a little bit. And so that got popular for a while. But over the last 10, 12 years, there's been a lot of different biological products that have come out and said, hey, we can break down stock residue. And I'll never forget, we started this process probably, you know, 15, 16 years ago, where we started to take a look at that, saying, hey, if we go out in the fall after harvest and we spray these stocks with, you know, a couple of gallons of UAN and a good biological product, you know, can we jumpstart, so to speak, that breakdown process with the bacteria and the fungi, and can we help release more of those nutrients back to the soil? And can we help take that stover 7, 8 tons an acre and say, can we reduce that down to 4 or 5 tons an acre so it's easier for, you know, either the field cultivator or the no-till planter to run through that field? And I'm here to tell you, yeah, there are ways we can do that and make that work and help improve the fertility of that soil, and also help improve the whole spring planting process and make it simpler when that equipment rolls through the field.
All right. And what would be Red Star's solution to that?
Well, at REDSTAR, we're working with a product called Breakdown. That's pretty good name.
You know exactly what it's going to do.
Dude, you know exactly what it's going to do. But when we developed Breakdown, Ryan and I looked at a lot of different products that were on the market today for breaking stuff down. And then we went and looked and said, okay, what do the soil microbes need at this time of year, which is in the fall, or if it's an early spring application of Breakdown, to where we can, keep those microbes active or keep them in the game, so to speak, and help improve that breakdown process. And so when we look at Breakdown, we've got what I believe are some of the 3 or 4 key things that you need. One, you need to have a little bit of nitrogen and sulfur fertilizer. Okay, ammonium thiosulfate. A lot of growers have been using that for many years. It's just going to be a quick food source for the soil microbiome, and it's going to help kind of jumpstart that process. The second thing you need is a really good biological. You need to have something that is broad spectrum from bacteria, and what I think is maybe more important is the fungi, right? Because when you start to look at residue breakdown, breaking down that complex carbon, fungi play a huge role in that part of it. And I think there's a lot of companies that miss that. So that's really important. And we've got a really good biological product for that. And then the second thing is you need sugar. And I oftentimes will revert back to the Snickers commercial, right? Where Danny DeVito, he's the guy, he's kind of cranky and, hey, Johnny, you need a Snickers, gives him a Snickers and wow, next thing you know, he turns into Arnold Schwarzenegger. But the sugar is important because those bacteria, when we get into the fall, we might get some nice 40, 50 degree days, but boom, we're bopping down to 18, 20, 25 degrees at night. That gets to be a shock on that microbial population. If we've got things like sugar in there, that's a really good quick food source for them. And it just kind of keeps their populations from the big ebb and flow swings that you can see in the fall or the early spring.
Well, it makes sense to put some sort of carbon, whether that be sugar or you name the carbon, because the biology in our soil, our plants are giving sugar to them all year round. So if we're applying something, why not put that carbon source with it?
Yeah, and one of the key simple carbon or sugar source that we're using is one that is really good with plants, and it's based on a sugarcane molasses. And it seems like that type of sugar has worked really, really well, and it just seems like the soil microbiome is responding to that type of sugar really, really well. And that's one of the reasons why we use it in our formulation and breakdown.
Okay. So I know we've had a couple plots out in our extensive Bred RX plots. So what's the data that you've seen with breakdown compared to a check in these plots?
Yeah. So, we look at our products. We also look at competitive products, whether it's the market leading products or new products that are coming on. So we're always evaluating what the market has for products and then what we're looking at. And again, we're primarily looking at when we come up with products, how do we solve problems and solutions that our customers have in our area, and then say, okay, how far can we take that out? But, last fall we went out and we put on several treatments. We put our own on, we did some of the competitors' products as well and compared to the check. And then, we came back in the springtime and you were part of that.
Yep.
And we went out and we worked with one of our key partner labs that we work with. They laid out the trial and said, hey, this is what you need to do. And so we went out, we collected the data as how they wanted it done. We sent it to their lab and they basically went through and analyzed it and scored it. And we saw some really, really big reductions in the amount of stover. What surprised me was how much fertilizer we unlocked on a per unit basis. And then when you started to put that back to a dollar amount, it was crazy. But, looking at 250 bushel corn, 250 bushel corn is going to use 280 pounds of nitrogen, 128 pounds of phosphorus, 338 pounds of K. It's going to use 40 pounds of sulfur, just short of 40. And it's going to use 35.8 pounds of calcium. And when we got the data back, I was a bit blown away. You know, we released 26.8% of a 250 bushel corn crop's nitrogen, 75 pounds. Phosphorus, just shy of 21 pounds, or 16% of what that 250 bushel corn crop would need. Potassium, 30.3 pounds, which is, less than 10%, a little over 9%. Sulfur, 15% of what that crop would use. But the one that shocked me was the calcium. Breakdown release out of that stover, 35.7, which is 99.5% of the calcium that next corn crop is going to need. And so calcium is really the building block, right? It's the building block for you and me. It allows us to stand up. It allows us to move. It's the same way with the corn plant. Calcium is the building block for everything. And the fact that we can have almost 100% of that calcium there, that makes things so much easier next spring when you plant that crop, that as that new seed starts to germinate, it doesn't have to work as hard to try to get calcium because we've unlocked it and released it and it's there. So a lot of value in breakdown and what it's providing.
Yeah, and while there is still some nutrients left in that stover, we're never going to get it all.
No.
That is a very dramatic increase in availability. And a lot of that's going to go right to next year's crop. So do you have a dollar amount that comes out to roughly?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of our initial dollars that we worked with here a couple of months ago was right a little over $163 an acre. And we're going to have to redo that now simply because, MAP has moved up, potash has moved up, nitrogen's moved up a little bit from what it was in June. And you're going to be just shy of $190 an acre. And again, that's looking at NPK and also, the secondary and the micronutrients as well. But, that's a lot. And that's a good value for a customer to know that, hey, I can unlock that on my farm today without having to invest, a penny in dry or liquid fertilizer.
Yeah, especially with, unfortunately, what grain markets are looking like. Going into a tight year, saving $160 on fertilizer, that's a huge benefit to growers. So with breakdown, what are some of your best practices? Traditionally, I think with any biological, follow the combine out of the field with it. Obviously, we can't do that, but what do you like to see customers do with breakdown?
Yeah, so I think it kind of depends where you're at, longitude-wise. As we get going north, right, you get up in the Dakotas and Minnesota, if you're going to put that product on in the fall, I think you want to try to have it on, November 1st, kind of a deadline time frame. Now, again, that can kind of depend on the fall a little bit and what the weather looks like. But, it gets colder up north a little faster than it does down here. Now, as we get down to where we're at in eastern Nebraska, I think we've got until Thanksgiving to get these things put on. And again, if you've got, a lot of corn on corn and you start harvesting in October, if you can get out there a week or so after the combine has been through it and you can get breakdown sprayed on, you're going to see real benefits of it the next spring. So, yeah, to me, where we're at, we have until about Thanksgiving time here in Lee, Nebraska. And as you go north, and I'm just going to say Watertown, 212, Minneapolis, Watertown, as you go north, probably want to have that done by the 1st of November up that way.
Okay. So say we do end up having a colder winter and it sets in earlier. Is this a product you can use in the spring, maybe mix it with your 32% or ATS?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, on my own farm where I've gone corn on corn, that's what I have done historically, is just applied it in the springtime with my 32%. And, yes, we'd like to have it out there in the fall, but even if you can't get it out there until the springtime, it's still going to help break that nutrient down and release that back to your crop. We do a lot of things with the nutrient demand curves that Fred Bilo developed at the University of Illinois. And again, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to unlock that fertilizer, whether you put it on in the fall or the springtime, we're going to help unlock that fertilizer. So it's really on in terms of the timing. If you can get it on just after planting, like with your pre-emerge application, that will work too to help break down and release that fertilizer back. And the one thing that breakdown does that a lot of the other biologicals don't is we've actually got the data to support that we actually reduce nitrate leaching. And so that's a big component of this whole fertilizer game, as we've seen in 2024 with all the rain. If we can help hold some of that nitrate from leaching and hold it in the root zone a little longer, that's going to translate to yield.
Yeah, definitely, especially with all the rainfall we've seen this year and what some of the people here have done with soil tests. We see we lose a lot of that nitrate. So being able to hold on to that and actually utilize their input dollars, that's a very big deal. So is there anything else that you think people need to know about breakdown, Tom?
The rate's a gallon per acre. It can be applied with water, or it can be applied with liquid fertilizer. I know there's some folks who apply liquid P and K to their farm in the fall. That's fine. We can go into that type of situation and work really, really well. The reason that we built fertilizer into the formulation of breakdown is so you don't have to add any additional nitrogen to it. There's a lot of products out there that say, hey, we want you to add 3, 4, 5 gallons of 32% with it. When we develop breakdown, we sort of put that sulfur and nitrogen in there, so you don't have to mess around hauling 2 products. Hey, take the breakdown, mix it with your water, and go. We'd like to see a minimum of 10 gallons of water an acre in the fall. And, there's a lot of places, too, that are starting to do fall herbicides. Mm-hmm. And so it's compatible with your fall herbicides if you want to put them on. So, yeah, if you've got the time in the fall, it's a great practice. In a year like this, you mentioned, where grain prices are, a little lower than we would like, budgets are a little tighter. It's just going to help you unlock the valuable nutrients that next year's crop's going to need to help make your operation profitable in 25.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Tom. So how can potential customers get a hold of you?
If you want to get a hold of anyone at REDSTAR, you can go online, www.redstarne.com or www.redstarbranded.com, either one. Or you can give us a call at 1-844-502-9368. And Lori or somebody will answer the phone and get you to one of our sales team. Or if you want to ask for my name, that's fine. Be happy to call you and answer any questions that you might have about breakdown and residue, and maybe some things that you can do to improve that for 2025.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Tom, and thank you everybody for listening. We'll see you next time.